Adolf Hitler was responsible for tens of millions of deaths, but he didn't kill anybody directly himself. Well, except perhaps for one person, Geli Raubal. She was Adolf Hitler's half-niece, born to his half-sister Angela Raubal in Linz in Austria in 1908. Hitler's father had been married 3 times. Adolf was born of the 3rd marriage, whilst Alois Jr. and Angela were born of the 2nd marriage. In the 1920s, after Hitler had become leader of the National Socialist Party in Munich, he renewed contact with Angela and by now the teenage Geli in Vienna. In 1925, he brought them to his retreat at Berchtesgaden as housekeepers and soon afterwards to Munich. Geli was said to have blossomed into a striking young woman, and Hitler's interest in her went far beyond the avuncular. He took her to cafés, cinemas and the opera, paid for singing lessons in Munich and Vienna, and paraded her in his circle as a kind of consort. Observers noticed that he hovered around her in obvious infatuation and was increasingly jealous and possessive, while she enjoyed the attention and status, but chafed at the control and virtual confinement in his household. In 1929, Hitler moved into a large luxury flat on the Prinzregentenplatz in Munich and installed Geli there, sending her mother back to Berchtesgaden. Though they had separate bedrooms, they now lived together, with Geli effectively dependent on him and watched over by him. Reports from those around them describe frequent quarrels, especially over her desire for independence, including trips to Vienna, where she had at least one close relationship that Hitler disliked. By 1931, she was said to be increasingly desperate to get away from him and return to Vienna permanently. On Friday the 18th of September 1931, as Hitler was preparing to travel north for a political engagement, the two argued again, apparently over Geli's plan to leave for Vienna. Later that day, she began a letter to a friend there, speaking cheerfully of an imminent drive to the Semmering, which broke off suddenly in mid-sentence. Sometime that night, she was shot in Hitler's apartment with his own 6.35 Walter pistol. The next morning, house staff reported finding her dead in her room. Police quickly accepted the version that she'd committed suicide, and the Bavarian Justice Minister Franz Gordner allowed only a cursory post-mortem before her body was sent to Vienna for burial. The party press office tried to explain the death as the act of a young woman nervous about an upcoming musical performance. Anti-Nazi papers in Munich, however, reported a violent quarrel over her wish to go to Vienna, mentioned other injuries such as a broken nose, and hinted at darker motives and even murder. Hitler, fearing damage to his political career at a time when he was preparing a presidential campaign, issued a carefully worded statement denying repeated quarrels or opposition to her Vienna trip, but not addressing all the suspicious details. For a time, the scandal threatened his position, with newspapers speculating about the nature of his relationship with Geli and the circumstances of her death. But once the body was buried and official inquiries stifled, the affair was allowed to fade from public view. By the end of 1932, despite lingering gossip in Munich, the unresolved mystery of Geli Raubal's death had not prevented Hitler's continued political rise. On the 18th of September 1931, we can reconstruct Geli's last day in outline, but almost every stage rests on partly conflicting contemporary testimonies. Still, putting those together gives a reasonable picture of what could have happened. In the morning, 2 different journeys were planned. So, by all accounts, both Hitler and Geli began that Friday with travel on their minds. Hitler was due to leave Munich for northern Germany via Nuremberg and on to Hamburg to speak at a major rally that weekend as part of his presidential ambitions. Geli was talking again about going to Vienna, this time not just for lessons, but to leave Munich altogether and resume her life there. Several witnesses later said that in the days before, Geli had already tried to get away. She travelled to Berchtesgaden only for Hitler to call and demand that she return to Munich. When she came back, her anger and frustration were obvious to the household staff. On the morning of the 18th of September, she was once more insisting that she would go to Vienna. Hitler was equally insistent that she would not go away whilst he was away. At midday, there was a quarrel over Vienna, and we know this above all from John Toland's book and the testimony that he managed to acquire from Hitler's housekeeper, Frau Annie Winter. Hitler and Geli ate a simple lunch, which was spaghetti, in the apartment on the Prinzregentenplatz. During the meal, a discussion about her trip flared into a serious argument. Hitler told her that she was forbidden to travel to Vienna whilst he was gone. Now, Geli, according to Winter, left the dining room in tears, her face flushed with anger. Shortly afterwards, Winter heard something smash in Geli's room. She later assumed a perfume bottle thrown in temper, a detail that reinforces the sense of an ongoing heated quarrel. The Münchner Post, in its first report a few days later, echoed what it heard from informed sources. Quote what it said, that on Friday, Hitler and his niece had another fierce quarrel. That's a direct quote. That the cause was her wish to go to Vienna and become engaged there, and that Hitler was decidedly against this. Now, in the afternoon, Hitler left the flat. We have a contemporary anti-Nazi report and the later narrative by Konrad Hayden, and they both agree that Hitler left the flat that afternoon. Hayden describes Geli leaning out of the window of the Prinzregentenplatz building as Hitler's car stood below. She called down, "Then you won't let me go to Vienna." Hitler shouted back with a curt "no," and the car pulled away. Hitler later denied this in a written reply to the Münchner Post that there'd been any quarrel at all that day, insisting that there was no row, no excitement when he left the apartment. But that denial conflicts with Winter's account and the anti-Nazi press reports circulating already in late September 1931. After Hitler's departure, Geli remained alone in the apartment with the Winter household staff nearby. Sometime later that day, she sat at her desk and started writing a letter to a friend in Vienna. The Münchner Post got access to it and quoted the beginning. "When I come to Vienna, hopefully very soon, we'll drive together to Semmering an. The final D is missing. So, und, there's UN, but no D at the end of it. The letter has broken off mid-word, suggesting a sudden interruption. The tone is striking. She writes as if her visit to Vienna is certain and imminent, planning a pleasant excursion to the Semmering. There is no trace of despair or talk of suicide in the surviving fragment. This letter is the last concrete act we know of Geli. We know that Geli performed on the 18th of September 1931. The sources from here on are divergent, or they fall silent completely. The Winter couple claimed they heard nothing unusual during the night, no shout, no gunshot, no nothing. No independent record fixes the exact time of death. It must have occurred sometime between the writing of the letter on Friday afternoon and the late morning of Saturday 19th September, when Geli was found lifeless in her room with Hitler's pistol nearby. Because there was no thorough investigation and only a perfunctory post-mortem, we have no reliable official reconstruction of the hours after that unfinished letter. Contemporary anti-Nazi reports mention a broken nose and other injuries, implying some kind of violence before the shot was fired. But these details were not properly examined in 1931. Now, it's important, I think, to remember what else the 18th of September 1931 meant for Hitler. He was the leader of a rapidly growing party entering a crucial phase in his push for national power. The planned trip north that day was part of his effort to position himself for the 1932 presidential campaign. The fierce quarrel over Geli's wish to leave Munich and his refusal to let her go to Vienna therefore took place against the background of a man who believed that he was on the threshold of national leadership and who feared any scandal that could derail his rise. So, what can we say for certain? On the 18th of September 1931, Hitler and Geli spent the day in a close, increasingly tense proximity, a morning and midday dominated by arguments over her plans to go to Vienna, a dramatic exchange at the window as he left for his political journey, and after his departure, Geli's hopeful unfinished letter about that very trip. Everything else that followed, the shot, the discovery of the body, the official suicide, and the political damage control belongs to the hours and days after this date. But the decisive emotional and practical break between Hitler and Geli took place on that Friday within the cramped rooms of the Prinzregentenplatz flat. In part 2, I will examine the possibilities of what really happened, and having now given you the facts. Thanks for listening.